Hello and welcome to our channel. My name is Detective Joe, and today we'll touch upon one of the most tragic criminal cases in the history of independent Ukraine. Our episode is dedicated to Anatoly Onoprienko, a man who went down in history as one of the most brutal serial killers not only in Ukraine, but worldwide. Before we begin, I must warn you, this episode contains descriptions of real crimes and may be unsuitable for sensitive audiences. Our goal is not sensation, but an attempt to understand how society can prevent such tragedies in the future. Part 1. Biography and Early Years. Anatoly Yuryovich Onoprienko was born on July 25, 1959, in the village of Lasky in Zhytomyr Oblast. His childhood could hardly be called happy. His mother died when the boy was only 4 years old. His father, unable to cope with raising him, sent his son to a boarding school. Childhood in the boarding school formed in Onoprienko a sense of alienation and loneliness. According to his classmates' memories, Anatoly was a withdrawn child, often becoming the object of bullying, which likely influenced the formation of his personality. After finishing school, Onoprienko entered a forestry technical college, then served in the Soviet Army. In the 1980s, he worked as a firefighter, but already had problems with the law, petty thefts, fraud. Nothing, however, foreshadowed the wave of violence that would begin later. Part 2. Beginning of criminal activity. Onoprienko's criminal career began with minor offenses, but gradually grew into something much more terrifying. The first serious crimes date back to 1989, when by his own confession, he committed his first murders. However, the real wave of terror began in 1995, after his return from abroad. Onoprienko had lived in Germany for some time, working in construction, but was deported for violating visa regulations. Returning to Ukraine, he began methodically committing crimes that shocked with their brutality. His victims were entire families in rural areas and small towns in western Ukraine.
Criminologist, Onoprienko's case is special in that he acted according to a clearly defined algorithm. He chose remote houses, killed all witnesses, including children, took valuable items, and then set fire to the crime scene. Such methodical behavior is rarely found even among serial killers.
Part 3. Crimes and Motives. The killing spree of Anatoly Onoprienko began in 1989, but the most intense period of his crimes occurred between 1995 and 1996. Let's examine the pattern and details of these horrific murders.
Investigator. What made Onoprienko's case particularly disturbing was his methodical approach. He typically targeted isolated homes in rural areas or small towns, often during late evening hours when families would be gathered together. His first documented murder was in 1989, but after a hiatus, he resumed killing with unprecedented ferocity in 1995.
The geography of his crimes spanned multiple regions of Ukraine, primarily in the western oblasts: Lviv, Zakarpattia, Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil, Zhytomyr, and Rivne. This wide distribution initially made it difficult for investigators to connect the crimes.
Forensic expert. Onoprienko's signature method involved first shooting the adult male of the household, typically with a 12-gauge shotgun, to eliminate the primary threat. He would then methodically kill all remaining witnesses, including women, children, and even infants. What was particularly chilling was his use of different weapons for different victims. After the initial shotgun blasts, he often used knives, axes, or hammers on the remaining family members.
One of the most horrific episodes occurred on December 24, 1995, Christmas Eve, when Onoprienko murdered the Zaichenko family in their home near Garmarnia in the Ivano-Frankivsk region. He shot the father, Pyotr Zaichenko, then killed his wife and 2 children with an axe. Before leaving, he set fire to the house to destroy evidence.
Psychologist. The timing of this particular murder on Christmas Eve suggests a symbolic element to his crimes. He later claimed in interviews that he specifically chose significant dates for some murders, viewing himself as an instrument of some higher power.
Just a week later, on January 2, 1996, he attacked the home of the Pilat family in the village of Bratkovichi, Lviv Oblast. After killing all 5 family members, parents, and 3 children, he stole items including a modest amount of money, a stereo system, and some clothing. This established another pattern in his crimes, taking small, often insignificant items from each crime scene.
Investigator, the items he stole rarely had significant value. In his confession, he claimed he took these items as trophies to fulfill what he called a mission. For example, from the Bodnarchuk family home in Olevsk, Zhytomyr Oblast, after killing 4 people, he only took a few silver spoons and some clothing.
One of the most disturbing aspects of Onoprienko's crimes was his treatment of children. In several cases, he specifically pursued children who tried to hide or escape.
Forensic psychologist. In the Dubchak family murder in March 1996, 2 children initially managed to hide under their beds. Onoprienko systematically searched the house until he found them. This contradicts his later claims that he was merely following orders from voices. His actions showed clear premeditation and determination to leave no witnesses.
The murder of the Krychkov family in the Zakarpattia region demonstrated another disturbing aspect of his methodology. After killing the parents and their 2 children, he arranged the bodies in a specific pattern before setting fire to the house.
Criminologist, this ritualistic element appeared in several crime scenes. Sometimes he would place the bodies in a cross-like formation. Other times he would position them in a circle. When questioned about this later, he gave contradictory explanations, sometimes claiming religious significance, other times denying any pattern at all.
By early 1996, the frequency of his attacks increased dramatically. Between March 22nd and March 24th, he killed 17 people in just 3 days, attacking multiple locations in the Lviv region.
Police officer. The March killings represented a significant escalation. On March 22nd, he killed a family of 4 in Busk. The next day, he murdered 5 people in a nearby village. And on March 24th, he shot a young couple in their car and then killed 6 members of a family in their home just hours later. The brutality and frequency suggested he was spiraling out of control.
His final murders occurred on April 6, 1996, just days before his arrest. He killed a mother and her 2 sons in their home in the village of Brovary, near Kyiv.
Investigator, what's particularly tragic about the final murders is that by this point, police had significantly narrowed their search. Had he been apprehended just days earlier, those final victims might have been spared.
In total, Onoprienko confessed to killing 52 people, 43 in his most active period from 1995 to 1996, and 9 more in earlier years. The victims ranged in age from a 3-month-old infant to elderly individuals in their 70s. Part 4. Investigation and arrest. The investigation of the series of murders was extremely difficult. Ukraine was experiencing the economic crisis of the 1990s, and the law enforcement system was operating with limited resources. Additionally, the crimes occurred in different regions, complicating coordination between local police departments. Initially, investigators didn't even connect these crimes to one person. Only after analyzing the method of killings, ballistic expertise, and other evidence did it become clear that the same criminal was operating. In April 1996, Onoprienko had already been detained, but due to procedural errors, he was released. This led to a new wave of murders. Anatoly Onoprienko was finally detained on April 14, 1996, in the city of Yavoriv, Lviv Oblast. The arrest became possible thanks to testimony from his acquaintance, who noticed items belonging to victims in his possession and informed law enforcement. During the search of Onoprienko's residence, numerous pieces of evidence of his involvement in the crimes were found. Weapons, personal belongings of victims, valuables. A particularly important find was a sawed-off shotgun. Ballistic examination confirmed that most victims were killed with this weapon.
Former investigator, when we entered the apartment where he was hiding, Onoprienko behaved surprisingly calmly. He didn't resist, didn't try to escape. This is typical behavior for serial killers of this type. After detention, they often show relief, as if a burden has been lifted from them.
After his arrest, Onoprienko quite quickly confessed to the crimes. His testimony was detailed. He remembered the smallest details of each murder, confirming his sanity. Part 5. Trial and Imprisonment. The trial of Anatoly Onoprienko began in November 1998 and lasted until April 1999. It was one of the most high-profile criminal trials in the history of independent Ukraine. Court sessions were held in the Zhytomyr Regional Court. The case consisted of 99 volumes and over 400 witnesses were questioned. During the process, Onoprienko behaved defiantly, often changing his testimony, trying to manipulate the court.
Lawyer. This process was unprecedented for the Ukrainian judicial system. For the first time, a case of a serial killer of such magnitude was being considered. The court had not only to establish guilt, but also to determine whether the defendant was sane at the time of committing the crimes.
Psychiatric examination found Onoprienko sane, although it revealed signs of psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder. This meant that he was fully aware of his actions and their consequences. On April 1, 1999, the court found Anatoly Onoprienko guilty of murdering 52 people and sentenced him to the exceptional punishment, the death penalty. However, in 2000, Ukraine abolished the death penalty, and the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Onoprienko served his sentence in Zhytomyr Prison No. 8, where he was kept in a solitary cell under enhanced security. According to prison staff memories, he was an exemplary prisoner. He didn't violate the regime, read a lot, and wrote memoirs. On August 27, 2013, Anatoly Onoprienko died in prison from heart failure at the age of 54. Part 6. Psychological Profile and Analysis. What prompted Anatoly Onoprienko to commit such horrible crimes? Psychologists and criminologists who studied his case identify several key factors.
Psychologist. In Onoprienko's case, we see a classic combination of factors often found in serial killers. First, traumatic childhood, early loss of mother, father's rejection, upbringing in a boarding school. Second, social isolation and feelings of alienation. Third, pathological desire for control and power over other people.
In interviews given to journalists after his arrest, Onoprienko himself claimed that he was guided by higher powers, that he was an instrument for cleansing society. However, experts considered these statements an attempt to rationalize his actions and avoid responsibility.
Criminologist. Such explanations are typical for serial killers. They create a complex system of justifications to give their actions some higher meaning. In reality, Onoprienko's motivation was much simpler. He derived pleasure from controlling the life and death of other people, from the feeling of absolute power.
An important aspect of Onoprienko's case is his ability to remain undetected for a long time. He carefully planned crimes, chose remote houses, eliminated witnesses, and changed places of residence.
Psychiatrist. Onoprienko demonstrated a high level of organization and adaptability, which is characteristic of psychopathic personalities. He could seem like a completely normal person in everyday life, had relationships with women, worked. This ability to mask is one of the most dangerous traits of serial killers.
Experts also note that Onoprienko's crimes occurred against the backdrop of a difficult period in Ukraine's history: the collapse of the USSR, economic crisis, rising crime. Social instability created conditions in which the law enforcement system proved unprepared to effectively counter serial killers. Part 7. Impact on society and law enforcement. The case of Anatoly Onoprienko had a significant impact on Ukrainian society and the law enforcement system. First, it caused unprecedented fear among the population, especially in the western regions of Ukraine. People were afraid to stay in rural houses, installed additional locks, and created self-defense groups.
Sociologist. This case became a kind of watershed in the perception of security in Ukrainian society. If previously people mostly weren't afraid to leave doors unlocked, especially in rural areas, after Onoprienko's series of murders, the situation changed dramatically.
Second, the case revealed serious shortcomings in law enforcement: lack of a unified crime database, poor coordination between different units, lack of modern investigation methods. Former Ministry of Internal Affairs employee. After Onoprienko's case, significant changes occurred in the Ministry of Internal Affairs system. Special units were created to investigate serial crimes. New methods of criminal profiling were implemented, and the information exchange system between regional departments was improved. Third, this case influenced the development of forensic psychiatry and criminal psychology in Ukraine. It became a subject of study for specialists developing methods for detecting and preventing serial crimes. Part 8. Legacy and Memory. More than 25 years have passed since the beginning of Anatoly Onoprienko's series of murders. But the memory of these tragic events remains alive, especially in those areas where the crimes took place. In many villages of western Ukraine, monuments to the victims have been erected. Every year, memorial services are held to honor those who died at the hands of the killer. For local communities, these events became a collective trauma that is still being processed.
Local resident. Our village was never the same after what happened. Even now, decades later, people still remember and talk about it. The older generation still warns children not to open doors to strangers. This fear has become part of our local culture.
The case of Anatoly Onoprienko has been reflected in numerous books, documentaries, and journalistic investigations. Both Ukrainian and foreign authors have tried to understand the psychology of the killer and the social context that allowed such crimes to occur.
Journalist, this case is important not only from a criminological perspective, but also as a reflection of that turbulent time, the 1990s in post-Soviet Ukraine. It was a period of institutional collapse when old social norms were destroyed and new ones had not yet formed. In some sense, Onoprienko was a monstrous product of that transitional period.
At the same time, there are ethical questions about how to talk about such crimes. Some believe that excessive attention to serial killers can inadvertently glorify them, while the victims remain just numbers in statistics.
Ethics professor. It's crucial that when discussing such cases, we focus not on the personality of the killer, but on understanding the systemic problems that allowed these crimes to happen, on the memory of the victims, and on preventing similar tragedies in the future.
Part 9. Comparative Context and Prevention. The case of Anatoly Onoprienko is often compared with other notorious serial killers, both in the post-Soviet space and worldwide. Criminologists note similarities with the cases of Andrei Chikatilo in Russia, Jeffrey Dahmer in the USA, and others.
Criminologist, what unites these cases is not only the brutality of the crimes, but also certain patterns in the formation of a serial killer's personality. Early childhood trauma, social isolation, gradual escalation of violence. These factors appear in many cases, including Onoprienko's.
However, there are also significant differences. Onoprienko's case stands out for the number of victims killed in a relatively short period, the family nature of the murders, and the absence of sexual motivation that is often present in other serial killers. Forensic psychologist. Onoprienko's case is unique in many ways. His primary motivation wasn't sexual satisfaction or sadistic pleasure in the suffering of victims, but rather a distorted sense of mission, a desire to cleanse society. This makes his case particularly valuable for understanding the diverse psychology of serial killers. What can society do to prevent such crimes in the future? Experts emphasize several key directions.
Child psychologist. Early intervention is crucial. Many serial killers show warning signs in childhood: cruelty to animals, fire setting, persistent lying. If these behaviors are identified early and appropriate psychological help is provided, it's possible to prevent the development of violent tendencies.
Law enforcement expert. From the law enforcement perspective, it's important to have effective systems for tracking and analyzing violent crimes, identifying patterns that might indicate serial activity. Modern technologies and databases make this much more feasible than in the 1990s when Onoprienko was active.
Sociologist. On a broader social level, we need to address the conditions that contribute to violence: poverty, social inequality, normalization of aggression in media and culture. Serial killers don't emerge in a vacuum. They are in part products of their social environment.
Part 10. Conclusion. The case of Anatoly Onoprienko remains one of the darkest pages in Ukrainian criminal history. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature, social responsibility, and the limits of evil. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that Onoprienko wasn't some otherworldly monster. He was a person who grew up in our society, walked the same streets, and for many years appeared normal to those around him. This reminds us that the line between ordinary people and those capable of terrible crimes can sometimes be thinner than we'd like to believe. At the same time, this case demonstrates the resilience of society and law enforcement. Despite all the difficulties and limitations of that period, the investigation was eventually successful, justice was served, and important lessons were learned.
Psychologist. Perhaps the most important lesson from this case is the need for vigilance, not in the sense of paranoia or fear of others, but in terms of attention to warning signs, both on an individual and societal level. Many tragedies can be prevented if we don't turn away from uncomfortable truths.
As we conclude our exploration of this difficult topic, we should remember that behind the sensational headlines and shocking details are real human tragedies, dozens of families whose lives were forever changed by violence. Their memory deserves our respect and thoughtful reflection. By studying such cases, we hope not to sensationalize evil, but to better understand how to protect our communities and prevent such tragedies in the future. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. What other stories would you like to hear? See you next time.